Here are the top posts from Ask Science on the 19th of November 2019.
Karatech 169. How strong is human skin relative to other animals? Zentin. A human raised in similar conditions to animals winds up with very thick skin on the hands, feet and sun-exposed areas. Look at the skin on the feet of individuals who regularly walk barefoot and it's often quite thick. Then combine that with the increased need for thick skin on uneven, rocky ground. Most mammals have relatively similar skin, with examples like rhinos, elephants and other savanna animals being an exception due to the increased need for protection from sun and predators, as well as the need for water retention. The average indoor human, though, has thinner skin than we otherwise would have, being more similar to subterranean or nocturnal animals like moles and mice. Naomi Nekamimi. It's important to consider scale. To a rhinoceros horn you're not very thick at all. But on the scale of insects we are quite tough. There are areas of your skin that are tough enough that a mosquito can't bite you there. For example, we are definitely more vulnerable than most mammals. But to some creatures we are quite resilient still. The skin of an ancient human who likely had more scars, calluses, and weathering, would likely be much stronger than ours. But we live pretty easy lives, and usually prefer softer skin over tougher skin. Synonox. It doesn't answer your entire question, but I think it's worth noting that different skins, hides have different properties that might influence strength, depending on your definition. For example, falconers tend to use kangaroo leather because while it's not terribly difficult to pierce, it's very difficult to tear, unless you know the precise grain direction. Other mammalian leathers fail to meet with this requirement.
Shinorit. How do amoebas know not to fuse with other amoebas with the same genes?
Metacelsis. This process is known as phagocytosis, and it's tightly controlled. First, receptors on the cell membrane recognize the target object. Then the membrane, driven by cytoskeletal rearrangement, engulfs the foreign object before the membrane is pinched off to form a vesicle. This isn't the same as simply reattaching two pseudopodia. If two cells try to do this at once, they might fight over the object, but only one could completely engulf it. However, some amoebas can fuse by a different process, analogous to mating. Haploid amoebas, containing one set of chromosomes, can fuse to form diploid amoebas, containing two sets. C. And slime molds also have an amoeboid stage. Individual cells, which fuse into a plasmodium. Basically one giant cell. C.
Iserpizer. Why is the middle of the electromagnetic spectrum unable to penetrate solid materials?
AstroKiwi. Think of this in terms of wavelength and energy rather than frequency. High frequency means a short wavelength high-energy photon. It's like a tiny bullet that shoots through the spaces between atoms. Low frequency means a long wavelength low-energy wave, which gently sloshes the atoms as it passes through and around them. But at medium frequencies, U wavelengths can be just right to resonate with the atoms and the bonds between them, and the light interacts and gets absorbed. This may be a bit of an oversimplification, but I think it's a good way to think of it at first at least. Andronos. Photons with energies that fall within the middle of the electromagnetic spectrum just happen to have some options for strong enough interactions with matter. It means that their energy is enough to excite a certain type of process in this opaque material, through which they can get absorbed. For each of the energy ranges, these processes are different. For example, photons of infrared range can excite the rotational and vibrational movement of molecules, But you don't even know how wrong you are for generalizing all of the ionizing radiation as easily penetrative. The definition of ionizing radiation is its ability to excite individual electrons in atoms high enough to ionize these atoms. That's where the strongest absorption mechanism appears. If the photon energy is slightly above a given ionization potential, it has a very high interaction probability. The lowest ionization potential is 3.89 of Cs. So technically even 320 nanometers radiation could be considered ionizing. But for most elements the threshold is higher. So a virtual threshold is set to be at 10 electron volts. That's 124 n photons from approximately 10 nanometers to approximately 124 nanometers are therefore classified as extreme UV. And this is the most absorbing range of the whole electromagnetic spectrum. Here's absorption spectrum of so much so that it wasn't even historically classified, because if you don't perform experiments in high vacuum conditions, EUV photons will be absorbed by just several micrometers of air, and therefore will never be even detected. Unlike any other radiation, only after photon energies become high enough to be unable to excite outer electrons, the cross-sections of photoelectric effect become lower, and you get into less interacting hard X-ray range, where absorption becomes dominated by Compton effect and later pair production.
Protozone. Do earthquakes affect the planet's orbit?
And Val. If you mean, can an earthquake change Earth's orbit around the Sun? The answer is a flat-out, resounding no. It would take either a collision with another planetary-scale body of similar mass, or a massive rocket engine firing from the surface. However, an earthquake can, and even has, in the recent past, change the speed of Earth's rotation on its axis. Much like an ice skater pulling in her arms can speed up in a spin. It works on the exact same principle. Mass is redistributed either closer to the Earth's center, speeding up the rotation very slightly, or farther away from the center, slowing it down very slightly. The Tohoku earthquake in 2011 that caused the tsunami that resulted in Fukushima melting down shortened the length of a day by 1.8 millionths of a second. Relevant.
Galactic Otter. You're alright in saying that Newton's third law suggests this. Newton's first law is more useful in this case. An object stays at rest, in motion unless acted on by an external force. They leave external out most of the time. Since earthquakes are internal to Earth, they cannot cause the orbit to shift.
Edificatus. Particle physics. Can a particle have internal energy stored as anything other than mass?
Omicron per se 8. Internal energy, the way you are using it, is mass. Mass is energy that you cannot get rid of by changing to any reference frame, i.e. exists in the rest frame if the system is pure. A hotter object has, trivially, more mass. A fuel, chemical or nuclear, has more mass than its products. Two massless photons, that aren't traveling parallel, have a mass as a system is pure. A mirrored box with photons in it would have a mass, even within a composite particle like a proton. Electrostatic repulsion and the storing nuclear force affect the mass. Actually, most of the mass of a proton is the strong nuclear force binding energy. It weighs more than the quarks it's comprised of. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.